Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us at our CPD session around preparing students for debates and discussions as part of the T-level education and early years. What we're going to do first off is a quick introduction of who's joining us. I know Janet's running slightly late from a previous appointment, so I'll introduce myself first in the hope that she joins us in a couple of minutes. So my name's Gemma McGregor and I'm the Provider Development Officer for the Education and Early Years T-level. And our team is here to support you with the teaching and learning of the Education and Early Years T-level and hopefully support you in developing your own practice. And we really welcome you to the CPD event this afternoon. I'm going to hand you over to Helen now for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Gemma. Hello, everybody, and thank you for using your time, precious time, to join us today. So I work with Gemma in the Provider Development team, and just a reminder as well that, as Gemma said, we're here to do a support for teaching and learning. We can't answer any live assessment questions, I'm afraid, so please don't give us any. But if you have any other questions related to anything that we say today, or no questions, a silly question, please pop it in the chat for us. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Helen. I'm not sure if Janet's joined us yet, but in her absence, I'll quickly do a quick introduction to Janet. So Janet is our sector manager in education and early years, and she supports us on these events from a more subject specific point of view. So if you do have any questions around early years or assistant teaching specifically in terms of perhaps how you can talk about current debate in education, I'm sure Janet will be happy to chat with you about that as we move through this session. Okay, so the outcomes for today. So what we're hoping to achieve by the end of the hour is we're going to summarise element 9.2 and share current practice for delivery. We're going to share a discussion around current priorities and debates in education, and hopefully share a range of strategies for teaching and learning within element 9.2. So hopefully by the end of the session, you'll go away with some ideas and some strategies to try in your classrooms with your students to support that part of element 9 within the core elements. The first thing I'm going to ask you guys to do, if you can, if you've got a smartphone available, if you could scan the QR code on the screen and join our Slido poll. Now, please don't worry if you can't or if it doesn't work, you can always use the chat for the activity that we're going to be doing coming up. So this is just to get an idea of confidence levels. So we're going to have a poll around how confident you feel around the delivery of this element, and the QR code on the screen now should allow you to access our Slido for the session. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to scan that. But again, don't worry if it doesn't work. Excellent. Hopefully we've got a few people managed to log on. So the first slide we've got here is, as I say, a confidence scale. So what we'd like to know is, at a starting point, so at the start of the session this afternoon, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you feel in supporting students to understand current priorities and debates in education? Thank you. So 1, that's okay. Helen and I always say we once got asked if there was a minus number. So it's okay to not feel confident. That's why we're coming together this afternoon. 5, so in the middle. Lovely. That's really good. If there's anybody who can't access, lovely. Thanks, Julie. Just pop it in the chat, as I say. Excellent. So we're about midway. Most people are sort of in the middle, and that's fine. That's good that we've got a broad range because it means we'll have lots to share. Okay, moving on. So you'll have seen the description for the event today when you registered. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Jeanette. Element 9.2. So element 9.2, the student must understand the following current priorities and debates in education. Now, there's quite a lot of them, as you can see, and I have detailed them all from the qual spec on the screen. However, we wouldn't have anywhere near enough time in an hour to look at all of them, as I'm sure you'd know. So the ones that were included in the description of the event, you'll see are highlighted. But the one I'm going to focus on today, just for us to sort of throw some ideas around and share some practice, is the one that I've highlighted in purple. So we're going to look at the pros and cons of technology in classrooms as a starting point for a discussion and a debate. And I'm going to ask you to watch a short video, and then we're going to come together afterwards, and we're going to have a chat about what we feel and how we could extend that video and how we could use that kind of technology in our classrooms. So I'm going to ask you all a question first. And again, if you can't use the Slido, no problem, pop it in the chat. And it's a really broad question, and I've done that deliberately. So do you support the use of artificial intelligence in education? Wow, three-way split. So we've got, so we've got quite a lot of don't knows. Half of you don't know. Got some yeses and some no's, and then we've got some more yeses. Excellent. Excellent. So AI, artificial intelligence, is really relevant at the moment. It's really prevalent. It's everywhere. You'll have probably seen it talked about in your own settings, colleges, schools. It's been up for much debate in the news. There's been CPD delivered around it. So it's quite a hot topic at the moment. I think my teenage son possibly knows more about it than I do at this stage, but everybody's in a position, I think, where we're trying to learn about it and its applications. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to watch a video. It's only short, it's only about 4.5, 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back together and we're going to have a discussion around it.
How artificial intelligence, or AI, is transforming education in our schools, and not always for good. The latest computer software that can simulate human intelligence with such precision that you can give full answers to exam questions and write long essays in seconds. And they're so sophisticated it can be difficult for teachers to detect them. One of them is called ChatGPT and has even passed law exams. Well, it's now banned from schools and colleges in several countries, but so far not in the UK. But some say the new tech is so revolutionary we need to embrace it and learn how to use it ourselves. Martin Stew investigates AI's impact and how effective it can be.
In addition to general education, they have special technical courses. And as you see, the school is admirably planned and equipped.
Secretarial skills in the 50s turned to Sinclair Spectrums in the 80s. From little BBC acorns...
Yes, can't we do something more complicated than X squared or X cubed?
computers in schools have grown from a novelty to a necessity. But the evolution of IT in education is heading for a revolution, powered by artificial intelligence.
I am a machine learning model.
One tool, ChatGPT, can instantly provide fluently written, bespoke answers to any home or coursework question you can think of.
To visualize the text exchange, we've used an extra bit of AI to create an avatar of ChatGPT's answers. It's good to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too.
You're not a person, so what are you?
No, I am not a person. I am a computer program, also known as a machine learning model. Think of me as a really smart computer that can understand and talk like a human.
So how do you create your answers?
I create my answers by using the information that has been taught to me by my creators. They have fed me a lot of information from books, websites, and other sources, so that I can understand what you say and respond to it.
So how effective is it?
Okay, so I've asked you to produce a piece on the ethical dilemma of AI.
We asked ChatGPT to answer the same question as these pupils at Caterham High School.
Thank you.
So Richard, 2 of the 8 bits of homework I gave you were generated by AI. Any guesses which ones?
Well, I picked 2 here that I thought were generated by the AI algorithm. Some of the language I would assume was not their own.
You got one of them right.
Yeah.
the other one was written by a kid. Is this a power for good, or is this something that's dangerous?
I think it's both. Kids will abuse it. So who here has used the technology so far?
Students are already more across the tech than many teachers.
Who knows anyone that's maybe submitted work from this technology and submitted it as their own?
You can use it to point you in the right direction for things like research, but at the same time, you can use it to hammer out an essay in about 5 seconds that's worthy of an A.
You've been there working for months and suddenly someone comes up there with an amazing essay and he has just copied it from the internet. If it becomes like big, then a lot of students would want to use AI to help them with their homework because it's tempting.
And is that something teachers can stop?
Not really.
Are you going to have to change the sort of homework, the sort of assignments you give, knowing that you can be fooled by something like this?
Yeah, 100%. I think using different skills of reasoning and rationalisation of things like that to present what they understand about a topic.
In America, ChatGPT passed graduate-level law exams. Its use has now been outlawed by schools in New York City, several states in Australia, and some universities in France and India. The government here has no plans to ban, but says it's talking regularly to schools and exam boards to stop cheating.
I think we should definitely be excited.
Professor Rose Luccan says we should embrace the technology, not fear it.
This is a game changer.
And that teachers should no longer teach information itself, but how to use it.
There's a need for radical change, and it's not just to the assessment system, it's to the education system overall, because our systems have been designed for a world pre-artificial intelligence. They just aren't fit for purpose anymore. What we have to do is ensure that students are ready for the world that will become increasingly augmented with artificial intelligence.
My guess is you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
You can't.
So how do you mitigate this?
We have to embrace it, but we also need to say that if they are going to use that technology, they've got to make sure that they reference that.
Can you trust them to do that?
I think ethically, if we're talking about ethics behind this whole thing, we have to have trust.
But can we be sure AI itself is being truthful?
You should trust me because my creators have made sure that I give accurate and helpful information. It's important to remember that I am just a tool, and like any tool, it depends on how it is used. If my creators use me for good, then I can be helpful. But if they use me for bad, then I could be harmful. So it's important to make sure that people use me and other tools like me responsibly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
AI tools are being developed to try and spot computer-generated answers, but that may just be a sticking plaster fix. Learning how to use, not abuse, this transformative tech is the long-term goal. Martin Stew, ITV News.
Okay, so short video, wasn't too long. What I'd like you all to think about now is consider some of the questions that we've got on the screen. So when you're looking at debates and discussions around whatever it may be, whether it's policy, whether it's a current topic that's been raised such as this, what does it make you think of? So when you've watched that video around AI, then anyone can just, chip in, speak if you'd like, pop it in the chat. Has that video made you think? Have you thought about, when I asked you whether or not you supported the use of AI in education, has that video made you think? Has your view changed? Helen says she needs to know more. Why do you need to know more, do you think? Could you make a reasoned judgment and say, I definitely think we should be using AI in the classroom, just having watched that video? Was the information from a reliable source? And how do you tell? Could the information be biased? Where did it come from? And have you thought of anything that might impact on your practice? And was it negative or positive? Got some comments coming in. Definitely, Helen, you need to know more to make a reasoned judgment. There's more than one side to an argument, definitely. Yes, Jeanette, it makes you want to research further, looking at your own sector and its application. So that stands to reason then, I'd hope, that our students would want to be doing the same thing, make them want to research it further. Yes, Helen, do the students know the difference between using it for support or guidance and just doing a job for them? There's so many sides to these debates, and it's difficult, and these discussions around current topics in education. Getting your students to discuss them can be a challenge. And it's about looking for those teaching and learning activities or those teaching and learning strategies that engage them, just like Jeanette says, to want to research this further, looking at their own subject area. So whether that's relevant to early years or assistant teaching or education as a whole, and getting them to think about some of these questions that are on the screen now. And Helen's very right in what she says. Using it for support is great, but there's a real issue around ethical application of artificial intelligence and students using it to, for example, like the video suggests, create an assignment for them, answer a question, produce an activity plan, as an example for early years. But these same questions apply regardless of the topic, I guess. So whether you're discussing high stakes observations, whether you're discussing Ofsted, whether you're discussing educational reform, educational policy, all of these questions are relevant, and you can use them with your students moving forward when you're looking at any of those sort of themes within element 9.2. Oh, interesting. So Anna, you've changed your opinion based on the video because it seems it's very difficult or impossible to detect for teachers. Also, the argument that we should move away from teaching knowledge, I don't think is valid for early years education students because they need a wide range of knowledge to be successful in the sector. That's a really good point, Anna. It's a really good point. One thing I'd like you to consider as well before I move on to the next slide is how about using that kind of technology yourself? So not necessarily encouraging it within your students' sort of toolkit, but exploring AI as a way to generate teaching and learning activities, as a way to generate formative assessment activities, perhaps. It's definitely something that you might want to go away and look at further. But I think these questions really help you to look at the topic from more than one sort of space, really, more than one angle, and think about how that might impact on your practice. And that's what element 9.2 is all about. So it's all about looking at these debates and not just looking at them in isolation, but unpicking them and thinking about how they are going to be applied in practice, in their settings, in their placements, and in their day-to-day, in their real world of work when they complete their T-level. I think it can be hard for students to think about their own view. I find students want to be told the answer, not to explore their own knowledge. Yes, Jeanette, definitely. And I think that's where these higher order thinking skills come in. So where we're expecting students, and it's difficult when they've not done it before, to make evaluations and make comparisons and create their own opinions based on these judgments that they have to generate from other sources. So rather than where they've been in school and they've almost been, you know, expected to follow the teacher's opinion, we're now asking them to generate their own, and that can be hard. So I'm just going to move on to the next screen now and ask you if you can share any teaching strategies that you could use to explore current topics and debates in education. And when you open this Slido, you'll have a box that you can type into, and hopefully they'll pop up on the screen while I'm reading the comments. Case studies, lovely. So Jenna, lovely. I feel like as a teacher, I can use AI to help free up time and complete a task. Definitely. But I still feel I learn from what I get from AI. Sadly, the students don't take the time to still learn and read through the answers. Very good point. Why is it so important then, if we're going to use this kind of technology, to get students to look at what the AI generated content includes? Lovely. Thanks, Julie. We can pop that in for you so it appears on the screen. So we've got guest speakers, directed reading tasks, case studies. And are these things that you've all used before? If they are, brilliant. You might find some pop up that you haven't used. Consequences game. I'd love to hear more about that one. If we ever pop that on there, we could share a little bit. That would be great. Yes, articles. Where might we get those articles from, do we think? And why might that matter? Perfect, Helen. That was you. Yes. Yes, chip in. That'd be brilliant.
So consequences, as in everybody has a sheet of paper, you write the scenario at the top of it, and then you create your own case study by adding what happened next, and then passing it on to the next person, and it's kind of the story builds up from there and creates different scenarios with the same topic or subject, but because of what the different students put on them, they all go in different directions, and you can have a lot of fun, but also a lot of deep discussion about what goes on them as the build.
That's brilliant, Helen. I hadn't thought of doing something like that. That's great. And yes, you're going to get a lot of sort of deep discussion around a topic that may at first glance appear quite inaccessible. So some of the themes in 9.2 are looking at things like policy, funding of educational settings, for example, looking at Ofsted, things like that. They sound quite insurmountable when you're 16, but if you're going to make this fun activity like Helen's just suggested and really engage your students, then by the time they get round to using things like professional discussion in their actual summative assessment, they'll have practiced it so often and be comfortable with it that they will be able to relate those debates to their own practice and indeed their summative assessment. Fantastic. I'm going to move forward. Yes, thematic AI tool. Tell us more, Jeanette. So you have a tool in college.
Yeah, we do.
Sounds
Sorry,
great.
I might as well. Yeah, so what it is it's a tool for all the staff to use, and basically it will come up with things if you type something in. It's always been a bit suspicious, but basically it does things like quizzes. So you put a title in. I put one on healthy eating, made it quite easy for some of my low-level students, and it came up with some relevant quizzes we can do. It's got things on there where you can create case studies, things on there where you can come up with topics for discussions, and I think it's a way of making you see that AI isn't this scary alien. So we have access to it across the college, and we're kind of exploring it and using it.
Excellent. Have your students used it as well, Jeanette, or is it just the teaching team that used it so far?
No. So the teaching team have been using it. I don't teach the element 9, my colleague does. So she's been using a lot of those things to generate, because it's that whole, you can't get them to have an opinion. They just end up having your opinion. And it has a lot of probing stuff. So it's a bit like those pointers. We have to share access. I think our college pays for it. But I will say, how new things come along in technology, and I'm a bit more, I don't know. But actually, I actually quite support this way of doing it, because I just think it gives you other ways of thinking of things that you haven't thought of before, because you just need different ways of doing it. You can generate those rather than you thinking for them, or rather than you searching for things. Coming up with it will come up with games, comes up with all sorts of things. So it's quite a good tool if you can get your college to, that's what it looks like.
Is that it? Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Jeanette.
Worth exploring and making your college pay for it. I'm sure you pay for it. But definitely, this is what makes life shorter, I think, really, for delivery, because this is the type of things you want to do, isn't it? You want to be able to explore it, and that can be quite time consuming, I think. So yeah, you can get all those things on there. Yeah, you can do scenarios, case studies, and if you don't like it, you can ask it to do something else. So yeah, it's good.
Oh, that's great, Helen. If anybody can access it and wants to try it out, it looks like there's a free trial option. Excellent. But yes, you're right, Jeanette. It's something different. So you know, that may put some people off giving it a go. However, AI, I believe, has its place, and there are challenges with it, but we have just engaged in a discussion and a debate around one of those topics. So around the use of technology in the classroom. Between us, we've made it engaging. We've shared some things that we can take away from that. And you can do exactly the same with your students. So on this next slide, these are just some suggestions of teaching and learning strategies that you might want to use if you haven't already. And obviously, please do share any more in the chat if you can think of any as we're going. But these strategies are ones that either Helen, myself, Janet have used ourselves, or maybe we've picked up from other providers that have used these. So we've got presentations, small group or whole class discussions, peer discussions, which is great practice for the ESP tasks, debates, research activities, so looking at your students' academic literacy. By that, I mean looking at how sources are reputable, where they've accessed them from, looking at how they can make sure they reference those in their notes for the pre-release task, as an example, for the ESP. Micro-teach or peer teaching. So ask your students to go away and look at a particular debate in education and then come back and present it and teach their peers about that particular piece of policy or particular debate. Flip the classroom, if you've not heard that term before. So giving the students the task to do outside of class. So you might give them a research task and say, do that outside of the classroom in independent study groups, whatever, come back and present. And a top tip that we got from a provider just the other day, Helen and I, was that some providers are doing this over the summer for students before they begin the first year of their T-level in September. So giving them a pre-T-level, I guess, research task to have a look at over the summer break before they start in September, so that they've immediately got something to discuss when they join class for the new academic year. Case studies, I think somebody mentioned. Project-based learning, so a bit like the ESP in terms of giving them a scenario and getting them to go away and research it. Podcast creation, so could your students get online and create a podcast and they all take turns creating a podcast about a different debate in education, having a conversation with each other and recording it. Reflective activities, so looking back over previous debate, previous policy, and how things have changed over time. This next one, carousel style learning stations, one of our colleagues was talking to me about this the other day. It's quite commonly used in the health and science T levels, whereby you set up various stations around your classroom. Each one has a particular debate or topic, and the students move around the classroom exploring each one for a certain amount of time and then feeding back. Or the last one, which is probably the most techie, is the gamification and exploring interactive or mixed media in the classroom, which Jeanette has really helpfully supported me in sharing that AI tool in the chat. But you can also use things like Kahoot, the website Kahoot, where you create quizzes and it's all done on screen. You can use Slido polls, all sorts of things that you can use. And actually, even just going on to something like ChatGPT and asking it to give you some examples of formative assessment strategies using mixed media will come up with a wealth of different ideas and things that you can try. So moving on, we're going to focus slightly on discussion and debate now, because that was the title of the event today. So The definitions of these differ slightly. So a discussion is generally an activity in which people talk about something and share their ideas or opinions. So this can be formal or informal. So when they're talking about professional discussions in terms of the observations in the second year and indeed the ESP, you're going to have a more formal discussion. But it could also be a discussion around a topic amongst your students in their classroom. A debate, however, is something slightly different, and it's a term that's often used in educational policy, and it is quite an umbrella term for some of the themes that appear in 9.2. Now, a debate is, and it uses the word competition. Now, these are dictionary definitions, uses the word competition that inspires some and others recoil, but in which teams of people, often students, discuss a subject and the team that is judged to make the best argument wins. So you can use a debate as a teaching strategy, or a serious discussion of a subject in which many people take part with different perspectives, such as a parliamentary or educational debate. So as strategies for teaching and learning then, these are the sort of key differences between debate and discussion, and I think both have a place in the classroom, and I think both are challenging for the age range of students we're working with. However, that doesn't mean that they're not something we can kind of employ as part of our teaching and learning strategies. So a debate assumes there's a right and a wrong answer. One team wins and the other doesn't, whereas a discussion's more collaborative and we have pieces of an answer to create a solution together. A debate is more combative, so it attempts to prove the other team wrong. And a discussion is more collaborative, a common understanding. A debate listens to find flaws to a counter-argument, and a discussion listens to understand. In a debate, we critique only the other team, and in a discussion, we critique all views, including our own, which applies very much to those peer discussions in the ESP. In a debate, you defend your team, but in a discussion, it allows for other people's thinking to improve or inform your own. In a debate, we encourage the search for difference, and in a discussion, we want to kind of reach an agreement. A debate creates a winner or a loser. As I say, that motivates some and not others. And in a discussion, it's a bit more of an open end, leaving the topic open for further discussion or further development. So, for example, when we look at that peer discussion activity in the ESP, we want them to take that away. We don't want an end point necessarily. We want them to take it away, reflect on it, and we want them to use the feedback from that peer discussion in their forward planning moving forward. So if you're going to choose a debate or discussion topic in your classroom, and I'd love to hear if anybody has any that they've already used to share with the group, you can pop them in the chat or mute yourself and share it with us. Pick a topic that your students care about, especially to initially engage them and prepare them for debates and discussions as you move through the T level. They should have an opinion or even better, a personal connection to the topic. It's a really good way to make those links to placements, getting them to engage with a topic on something that they've experienced themselves. Consider your students' prior knowledge. You know them best, so you know the things that they need to really develop those higher order thinking skills with regard to. So if it happens to be that everybody has quite a sound knowledge around technology in the classroom, for example, but perhaps don't know much about how education is funded within the UK or England's education system, then that might be something that you want to spend a bit more time on. Can you find enough research to support it? So to support a debate or a discussion. So even if they have some knowledge or you've done something around it in class, they might not know where to search for additional information to support their arguments. Always a good one to mention, being mindful of triggers or sensitive language you might come across and plan to facilitate that. So any discussion or any debate needs to be done in a safe space. And the last one, if you're creating mock assessments, such as a professional discussion, use that criteria from the specification to support your planning. So think, what is it that they need to get out of this discussion? What can that support them in doing in terms of their summative assessment for the T-level? So Helen mentioned earlier on about those competency-based criteria. Can you make those links to those summative assessments to give your students the best sort of breadth of knowledge around current debates in education? As I'm sure you're all aware, we've now got a general election coming up, so it's quite a tricky time for debate in education. Things are paused somewhat. However, over the summer period, that will change. When we get a new government, we don't know how that's going to pan out, and there'll probably be a really interesting time for debates and discussions around educational policy and changes within early years, FE, HE, and education as a whole. So it'd be quite an interesting time for your students to start researching and planning to debate and discuss them. Now, these are just a few strategies you can use for having debates in your classroom. I'll not go through them all in grave detail because we do only have a limited amount of time, but you will be able to access this again on the recording afterwards. So these are a few types of debates that you could hold in your classroom. And what I've done is I've broken those down and also included a stretch and challenge activity at the end. So how you could extend that debate and get another couple of activities or tasks off the back of those. So, for example, we'll look at the middle one, 4 corners debate. So this is where in each of the corners of your classroom, you post an opinion or a response to a question. Students express their opinion or response by choosing a corner, and then they have to talk to everybody else about why they chose it. You can stretch and challenge your students from that by asking them to present their argument by a PowerPoint presentation, a poster, an infographic, or something similar, which they could create during independent study time or time allocated in the classroom. So getting them to use all of those different skills in one activity. So they're going to have to research something, use their academic literacies, they're going to be using their English skills, possibly their math skills if there's any statistical data within the research they've done, their digital skills to create a presentation or something similar to share with their peers, and they're going to really be having to evaluate and be critical about the opinions of others and come up with that reasoned judgment as to why they think the way they do, and then getting them to explore how that might impact on them in their placement. So here I just wanted to show you how the skills that you develop in debate and discussion link to the assessment methodologies within the T-level for education and early years. So the skills they're going to be developing here: critical thinking, public speaking, confidence. Somebody said that their students are really shy at the beginning. Everybody says that. I think it's quite common to be nervous about presenting to others. Teamwork, working together for an end goal. Assertiveness, being able to assert your opinion and give a justification. Planning, so how can they plan to get their argument across, and then presenting an argument. And sometimes presenting an argument and managing disagreement. So you may not agree with your peers, but it's how you can present that you disagree in a way that uses the right language and has the right research to back up those opinions. And they all feed really nicely into some of the formative and summative assessments you'll be doing across the T-level. So the professional discussions for the ESP, their peer discussions. It'll also support them in their extended writing questions for the core exams, if you get them to write case studies and that kind of thing. Their pre-release research activity, so how they put together those 4 pages of notes and how they reference those. And again, their structured observations when they have to have those professional discussions as part of assignment 2 in their second year. So really getting the students to engage with this kind of activity has embedded within it so many other skills that will support them with their assessments. So a few top tips for debates, and these have come from a couple of providers as well as my own experiences. Set ground rules. I guess that's probably the first thing. Turn taking, getting students to be able to actively listen to one another. Again, that's a really great communication skill to foster. Making sure that everybody gets the chance to speak. Planning a time frame. It can be really difficult to keep a topic on course, especially if people get enthused. And in preparation, you might want to ask students to create a list of sources to support their own knowledge. So this was a tip from another provider who gets their students to create a list of books, journals, articles, internet sources, that you can then ask the rest of the group to check, are the sources valid? Could they be biased? What are the references if they want to reference them in their notes later? Encourage them to read around a topic and develop their own academic literacy skills. So this might be something you could ask your students to do, particularly if you're starting delivery in September this year. You could ask your students to look at this over the summer, perhaps give them one of those themes and ask them to go away and do a short research activity. Create a prompt sheet with some debate vocabulary on there to support your students in communicating their ideas and opinions in an appropriate way, and also supporting them in the early stages while they get used to presenting things or speaking aloud so that they don't get tongue-tied. They've got some stock phrases that they can use. You know, it is my opinion that, from my own research, I found that, I believe this because, and it might help them be slightly less shy when they're asked to speak in front of a group. And then ask your students to complete a reflection activity after a debate or discussion. You know, so reflect on, particularly in debates, reflect on what the other team or what the other viewpoint was, and go away and maybe do a bit more research. These are great that's great, the reflective activity for professional discussion, so they can start thinking about what they might do differently next time, or if they were asked around something next time, what do they already know and what else could they add to that discussion? And then some top tips for professional discussions. Now, these came partly from a provider, but also from some of our moderation team. So encourage the students to lead the discussion themselves, and support them to contextualize it. So when they're looking at these current themes and debates, how does that relate to their practice? How can they relate that theory and debate to their practice? How will it impact on them? Will it impact negatively? Will it impact positively? Remind the student to be succinct in their answers. Long and lengthy isn't always best. Encourage them to think about how they can summarise their opinion. The best discussions are where the student thinks outside the box. This comment came from one of our moderators, and it's about really extending their knowledge. So not just I did this because, but why and what theory or what current research or debate supported what they did, because that will show a greater understanding. If the discussion's part of a summative assessment activity, for example, the ESP or assignment 2.2, support the assessors to ensure all the elements of each criteria are covered by preparing questions ahead of time. So prompts to drive the discussion forward. Create opportunities for students to engage in both formal and informal discussion. So when they're doing their peer discussion, as opposed to their professional discussions with yourselves or moderators, how's that different? What do they need to do differently depending on their audience? And lastly, there's not really a right or wrong way, but the best discussions are just that. They're a discussion. They're a two-way street, a two-way conversation, and not just a question and answer activity. We need to be stretching and challenging our students to really get underneath and inside a topic. So, having listened to me talk through all of that for the last 20 minutes and the video that we've just watched, and thinking about some of the debates and discussions in 9.2, and looking at the teaching strategies that we've talked about and the ones that have been shared in the chat, what would you say your confidence level would be now in terms of supporting students to understand current priorities and debates in education? Do you think you'd be a little bit more prepared, or have some new ideas that you could take forward to use in your classroom? Do you think there's anything else that you would benefit from knowing or having in order to look at this element with your own students? Thanks, Jeanette. Lovely. We've seen some increases. That's good. Hopefully, it means that you found some strategies that you can take away and that you can use in your classroom, and that you can really get your students thinking about how this all applies to their practice. The end of a T level, the idea is that we create students that are not only working at a particular level academically, so that level 3 standard, but also that they're ready to go out there in the world of work and they know what's going to be impacting upon them and indeed the children they're going to be working with in their settings when they go out there and they're working in the sector and they've got that license to practice moving forward. I'm going to turn my camera back on now so you can see me for the close. So, has anybody got any questions or any tips or anything that they'd like to share around debates and discussions, whether it's teaching strategies, any questions you'd like to ask, anything about any current debates that you've struggled with, ones you found particularly challenging, for example? I am aware things are going to change slightly moving forward, as I said, with the general election. How to make the quiet students talk, definitely. That's always a tricky one. And I think it's very much about making that safe, comfortable space. There isn't a right or wrong opinion in a discussion necessarily. It's all about making those reasoned judgments and why you believe what you believe as a result of reading round a topic. It's very difficult, as I think it was Jeanette that said earlier on, it's very difficult to get students to look at a topic and really unpick it and unpack it and apply it. Yes, definitely. Have a go at doing one first, Jeanette, and then see what kind of things work for your students and showing them what is a reasoned judgment. Exactly, Helen. So when you're looking at what a reasoned judgment is, what does that actually mean? How do they arrive at their opinion? They need to have evidence at their disposal. They need to have both sides of an argument. And they also need to think about how that works in their own setting, their own placement. And debate is more tricky, definitely. I would agree that discussion first. Debate's a bit more tricky to do. It does tease out more skills, and it is reliant on everybody being able to speak. So I think starting with discussions and moving forward, maybe picking a topic that your students are really interested in. So give them some debate topic examples and getting them to start with something that they're really engaged with. There was a top tip from another provider who said they put into ChatGPT and they asked it to create some discussion topics around education and early years, and it created some. The students then did a vote as to which they wanted to do a discussion on, and that's kind of how they started moving forward. Again, yes, exploring how to adapt the language used in different discussions. So professional language. So how would you change your language depending on the type of discussion. So we talked before about formal discussion and informal discussion. If you're talking to your line manager or you're talking to a key worker in your placement, that will be very different to if you were talking to parents at a parent-teacher evening, or talking to, you know, everybody else in your classroom, so your peers in who are also studying on the T level. So Julie, I use resources, give each student a few cubes, then as they make a point, they can put their cube back in the pot. Fantastic. Trying to get everyone to speak. Yes, that's brilliant. You've spurred me on there, Julie, because another provider I spoke to the other day, they have a talking stick that they hold. So while they're speaking, they'll then pass that on to the next person while they're speaking to encourage everybody to get them all to speak. And you will see people's confidence develop as they move through and the more discussions they take part in. So doing these kind of things early on, starting them early, will allow your students to develop their confidence and be able to challenge each other. Because that's quite a hard thing to do, is challenge and critique each other. But they're going to have to do that with the ESP tasks. They're going to have to look at each other's work and critique it and challenge each other. So it's a really good preparation for that. Yes, brilliant, Helen. Having preset questions on sticks with different colours. Yes, so it's a quick reference for us as teachers. We can easily differentiate by which colour that the student's holding up or using.
I've seen that done quite a bit in travel and tourism. They use that approach to try and get the right questions to the right students, and only the teacher knows what the colour coding means to, you know, to the students. It's just a range of coloured bits of stick, but they have different questions on that you can keep reusing as well, but keep getting different students to do them. So yeah.
And I think, you know, using strategies like that, it helps us in our planning as well, doesn't it? Because we can really get to think, okay, I'm going to use Helen's name as an example. So Helen's really quiet. Helen finds it difficult to engage with discussions. Maybe look at how I can best support Helen to be involved, and maybe not very involved in the beginning, but then sort of broadening those skills and encouraging further involvement as you move through. Getting them to plan their own debates as well. Yes, planning groupings for debates and discussions who are supportive of each other's needs. Lovely, Julie. If you've got someone who talks a lot, don't put them with other people that talk a lot. Perhaps sort of spread that out amongst the group. Some students you'll find are really confident and others not so much. So you'll know your students best, but getting them to explore those topics means that they'll develop that deeper understanding and they can apply them. So they'll be able to apply those debates and policy within education that can be somewhat dry topics to their extended response answers in their core papers, to their activity plans and their professional discussions for the ESP, and then take that forward into their observations in the second year as well. Having specific roles, yes, definitely. So I have got some information on that as well, about having specific roles in discussion. So 1 week somebody has the discussion and they're the note taker for a particular team, or they might be the spokesperson, and those roles are sort of moved around so that everybody gets a chance at having a go at a particular role. It can work really well because then everybody gets a chance, and it does mean that it's fair and equitable, so that those who may not feel comfortable initially could be the speaker a few weeks down the line, or when they feel a bit more comfortable in the group, for example. Definitely. Well, thanks everybody. I think we've got some fantastic suggestions. I'm going to go away and look at that AI resource. Yes, pairing up first. Yes, so getting students into pairs before you start anything. You know your students, and once they get to know one another as well, and you get to know them more, you'll be able to make these pairings based on which students can support each other, and you can do that in a careful way to make sure that the right skills are being developed for the right student at the right time. definitely. So we're almost at a close, and I don't want to keep anyone longer than we'd originally planned. So I have popped on the screen a QR code. So if you have got the smartphone and you managed to access the Slido and everything worked, Helen, Janet and I would love it if you could quickly scan that and leave us some feedback for the session today. I hope you've got something that you can all take away from it. I know some of you booked onto other events moving forward as well. And the last slide, which is after this one, has got a link on it to our upcoming events as well for moving forward for the remainder of this academic year, and shortly the new academic year will appear on there as well. So I'll leave that just for a second, and then I'll move on to the last slide so you can see the link. Excellent. So you'll see our email address on there. Obviously, I think most of you have been in contact with us at some point before already, but if not, you can get in touch with Helen or I via the provider development email. And then the link at the bottom is a link to the other events that we've got upcoming. So if you haven't seen that, do click on it, have a look at what's coming up, and we'd love to see you at our events moving forward. It's been lovely. I've really enjoyed this afternoon. Thanks everybody for coming. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Jeanette. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for your time and input.
Thanks, Helen.